This video is to go along with our A series for the QR2 preparation. QR2 is noticeably different in many ways than QR1. QR1 is heavily focused on orbital design, so you'll be doing a lot in that, hopefully you've got a lot of experience with it by now, of changing things like your apogee and perigee, your argument of perigee, your RAN, and you'll be moving the satellite around through a scenario, usually in STK, to try and put it in a favorable orbit. Many times with those scenarios for QR1, the calculation of the score is actually very straightforward. In many of them, it's simply you're trying to get an orbit to maximize contact time. So all you need to do is bring up the correct contact time and then divide that total number by something. And in short, it doesn't take much to get your score or run through different options. It's mainly a lot of moving the satellite in space. Well, that's going to change completely for QR2. In QR2, our scenarios are more focused around trying to set up for satellite design. Not the orbital design, but what components go into the satellite that can get the job done. Now, there are a lot of things that we're actually going to have to pay attention to that we've never had to pay attention to before. Common examples are how many solar panels we need to equip onto the satellite so that it can get enough power so that it can actually do its job. You might have to select what computer goes onto the satellite, or a series of cameras or scanners. We might also need to attach radiators to help maintain the heat level within the satellite. In short, there are a lot of things that we're going to have to decide on the satellite, and sometimes we won't even need STK for that at all. Now, our later series, B, C, and so forth for QR2 will actually incorporate aspects of STK, but A series, which this video is going to be mainly focused around, is an important setup that honestly won't actually use STK at all and will take a bit of a deviation from space-oriented missions. That being said, we've got several of them for you to take a look at in our A series. Right now, what I've got up is the briefing for our 2A1 series briefing scenario, and that's one where we're going through and we are going to design a vacation. Well, the idea on this is, okay, we're trying to get you ready for selecting components for spacecraft, which would include things, like I said, batteries and rocket engines and sensors, all of that. But to make it much more approachable, we're going to do something that's a little bit less esoteric, might be a good word for it. We're going to look at planning out a vacation. Now, the mission brief is here. It goes through and lays out all sorts of important information. And once again, in our ISAT briefings, we try to set up that we summarize the objective, the constraints, and the scoring for you. In the actual competitions, you may not have those summarized quite so succinctly. The main reason that we're doing these summaries with the objective and the constraints in the ISAT briefings is to get you used to how useful it is to have one location that can give you most of, not necessarily all of, but most of the key bits of information. When you're actually doing a competition round, you should probably go through and, while you're not given the objective and the constraints and the scoring, make certain that you're taking the extra time to clearly think through all of those things. So hopefully, by us providing them in the briefing, it gives you an idea of how useful that can be, and when you come to a real-world problem, a real-world challenge, you can summarize your objective, what you want to get done, your constraints, the limitations under which you're working, and in real life you wouldn't necessarily have scoring, but you could lay out what your preferences are. Okay. So I'm drawing your attention to that. But one thing that's going to be a bit different that you may not have seen in any of our QR1 materials are the components from which you will choose. Now, this is a common thing that you'll be looking at in both QR2 and QR3 for that matter, but heavily in QR2. When you're designing a satellite, you may have all sorts of different modules that you're trying to choose from, and broadly I'm referring to them as components here. For our vacation all we ever wanted scenario, you are helping a family lay out what their plans are to do on a one extra day vacation that they've got in a big city. Now, the big city has plenty of activities that they can do in both the morning and in the afternoon, but they have to balance them out appropriately. So, things that are available for the family to do are, in the morning, they could go to the museum, they could go to a skate park, a skyscraper. One of the tall skyscrapers usually have kind of an observation deck. Those can be pretty cool. City tour, where you might see local landmarks or historical things. Those can be pretty interesting and have a local flair that go with them. Or they could always just go to a major shopping center and get things like knickknacks and other stuff that they might want. Those are all things that are available in the morning. Each of them have an estimated cost, so the museum, including, say, the tickets for the 4 family members and also maybe a stop by the gift shop, the estimate on the cost would be about $400, and they suspect that they would spend about 4 hours time at the museum so that they could get a good feel for everything that's there. We're going to come back to PEP and KEP when we talk about actual scoring, but in short, they're describing how much enjoyment the parents, PEP, and the children, KEP, will get out of each of the activities. Museum is probably going to be a lot more appealing to the parents than it is going to be to the kids. And so as we can see, on a scale of 5, the parents will very much enjoy the museum, but the children, they'll like it all right. The skate park, however, the parents will not enjoy very much at all, so they've only got 1 on the enjoyment scale, while the children are probably going to like it quite a bit, so that one's on 4 for them. But there are ones where both parties might enjoy it equally, so shopping, everyone would probably get a little bit out of, so both of those are 3 and 3. Not the most memorable things, but definitely enjoyable. The afternoon activities include going to the beach, going to an amusement park, maybe engaging in some fine dining, stopping by an arcade, or going to a botanical garden. Now, each of these have an associated cost, time, and enjoyment level. Now, going through, we have some descriptions on the scoring. You'll notice that in here, the scoring starts to get a little bit more complex than what you may have seen in QR1. In particular, a staple for the ISAT series of scenarios, you're going to have probably several different factors that you're balancing, and each of them will be providing different amounts of points that go towards your total scenario score. A common thing in our series and also in the competitions is to balance your budget, to make certain that you're designing something within the cost frame that is either allowed or ideal. In this case, the parents are willing to pay enough that they could do any of the combinations based on money, but that doesn't mean that they'd be stoked about breaking the bank. They have a preferred budget of about $1,000, even though they're willing to go up to $1,500, which would actually pay for any of the combinations that we've got there. The other thing to keep in mind on the budget is, since they have an ideal, in this scenario and others, you may find that you can get positive budget points for coming in under the ideal budget, but you may also have negative points for coming in over budget. This is to try and represent in the score the quality of the solution. There are many scenarios where you can go over budget, especially if it's by just a little bit, but that's going to be one that you're really going to have to convince the people that, hey, it's a good thing to go over budget. If you get a much better job done by going over budget, that might make for a better solution than staying within budget. On the QR competitions, many times you'll have limiting factors, budget being one of them and weight being another, although we don't have to worry about weight in this particular problem. We've also got, in expanding on the scoring, for the vacation, it's not just how much you spend, but also the memories you make along the way, the enjoyment points as we're referring to them. We've got PEP, which is parent enjoyment points, and we've got KEP, which are children enjoyment points. Now, ideally, you want to get as many enjoyment points as you can, but the other thing that the parents are worried about is that maybe they, on the day that we're looking at for the vacation, they focus entirely on the kids having a good time, and maybe they'll go to like the skate park and then the amusement park, do all the things that the kids want to do. Well, that's going to get a lot of enjoyment points for the kids, but then the parents will look back on it and say, well, we also wanted to do some stuff that we would have enjoyed too. And so the parents, the family, has laid out that they want to make certain that both parties, the parents and the children, have an overall good time. So we have kind of an interesting multiplier system that we got here. Regardless of the actual total value of the enjoyment points for the parents and the children, we're also going to look at the difference between them. The parents think that it's probably better if both the parents and the children have a okay time, as long as everyone has an okay time to a good time, as opposed to They're not too stoked about the idea of the parents having a really good time and the children being bored and miserable, or vice versa. So in this, we are trying to set up in our scoring system something that favors balancing out the enjoyment of the parents and the children. To do that, we've come up with this. It's a multiplier. Okay, no matter what your values are for your parent enjoyment points and your children enjoyment points, you'll take those two values and subtract them. If you end up with a negative number on this, just take the absolute value of it. That's why we've got the absolute value signs here. But if they are equal to one another, then when you subtract them, you'll get 0, and that means both the parents and the children have about the same amount of enjoyment. Since that's a really good way to set up a vacation, at least for the memories involved, and no one will complain later that, oh, we just did Tommy's stuff and not my things. That's why we're setting up that we've got a multiplier of 3. You'll actually be able to triple your enjoyment score, the total amount you get from your enjoyment points, if you're balancing out the parents and the children. So that's probably going to be a pretty good thing for you to try and do. If they are within 1 of one another, so if the total parent enjoyment points are, say, 9, and the children enjoyment points are 8, then that means that you would have a difference of 1. Well, that'll still get you a multiplier of 2. You'll still double your points for that. And as you start getting where you're favoring either the parents or the children more, by the time you have a difference of 4, you're not getting a bonus, but you're also not losing anything. You have a multiplier of 1. And if you have a difference of 5 or greater, in other words, you're really pleasing one group but not the other, then you'll have a small penalty, all things considered, where you'll only get 75% of the score. In short, this is a way that we can set up that hopefully is not too mathematically complex, but is embracing the idea of something that we want as an outcome for this scenario. We want everyone to have a good time and hopefully be able to look back fondly on the vacation. Now, this is a multiplier that then multiplies the actual enjoyment points for both. So you might have a situation where your parent enjoyment points are 1, your children enjoyment points are 1, and so you only have like 2 points total. And since they're so close, we'd multiply that by 3, so you'd end up with 6. So in this, when we actually calculate up the full thing, we will find that having a higher amount of enjoyment points altogether might also offset the multiplier, at least by a little bit. So that's where our design comes in. You can't just max out 1, you have to try and balance these. And therein lies the challenge. Okay, that's a little bit of a jump in or a summary of the main scenario that we'll be taking a look at. Now, the other two scenarios that we have in A series are similar, but they start to get more complex in that you'll be designing a lawnmower that doesn't have as much on the enjoyment parts, but does have a lot of what we call related rates, which actually scales very similarly to the satellites, where you'll have grass cutting rate, or the amount of fuel in the fuel tank, or how quickly you fill the grass bag. Those are all things that carry over very well to the actual satellites. Now, granted, they won't be cutting grass or filling fuel tanks, but they'll be filling hard drives with pictures, among other things. And then the last one that we have is actually back to space itself. You'll be designing a colony ship to try and carry colonists out to Mars. But we're going to focus on the initial one, which is intended to be much more straightforward. I'm going to show you a few techniques that hopefully will prove useful in analyzing not only the scenario that we're looking at here, ISAT 2A1, but also the future ISAT ones, and more broadly, any QR2 style scenario and beyond. I think a lot of this will carry over to QR3 as well. All right, and for that, this is why we don't actually have an STK video for this particular series, because none of our scenarios actually need any information from STK and pretty much don't use it at all. But we do have a much longer video that you're currently in dealing with the sheets. Here's where we're going to introduce a lot of key ideas that hopefully will carry over to what you're doing. So now that we've given you a brief summary of Vacation All We Ever Wanted, we can jump into actually doing some analysis. Now, one of the first things that we're probably going to need to do, and this can be a little bit tedious, but will save you time long term. Many teams, when they first start out, try and write down all the scoring stuff and say, okay, let's go with something that sounds nice. Let's go with the museum, for instance, in the morning, and then we could go with the beach in the afternoon, and they start running their numbers and see what they would actually end up with. Well, that requires them to keep track of a bunch of the numbers, type a bunch of buttons into their calculator, like I am doing now for audio effect, and then they get a score, and then they go, okay, I don't know if that's good or bad. Now I'll need to check maybe the skate park and the beach, or the museum and the amusement park. There's a lot of different combinations on this. In fact, in general, with a handful of exceptions, you should be able to go through and basically take whatever your selections are of one setup and multiply it by the number of selections of the other, and then if there are more, just keep multiplying. So in this case, we have 5 morning activities, and we have 5 afternoon activities from which to choose. So 5 times 5 tells me that there should be about 25 unique solutions to this scenario. If there were a third component, as you'll see as you go forward, then we could multiply 5 by 5 times maybe, say 4 is the next one. Well, that would be 25 times 4. That would be 100 different configurations. Well, as you start getting to the more challenging ones, ISAT 2A3 has over 500 different combinations. Well, every time you're clicking numbers into a calculator, that starts to add up, which is where investing a little bit of time into sheets can actually help you out a lot. Okay, one thing that you will need to do is you'll actually have to take this information for our tables and actually put it over into sheets. But here I'm going to bring up Google Sheets, which most of my videos will go through. Excel will be very similar to this, but there are some cool things, particularly in this video that we're going to see, that Google Sheets can do much easier than Excel. There are a few things that Excel does better than Sheets, well, quite a few things actually, but for our purposes, our students have found Google Sheets to be a very good one, and on top of that, it's something that's a free resource that's available to everyone. Okay, I've gone to Google Sheets. You can see that I've got some of my previous stuff in here, including when I was developing this. I'm not going to click on that. I am instead going to start a new blank document. Okay, here's a little bit of recommendation for you in general, keeping track of your files. So on this, I'm going to say working ISAT 2A1. And then I could also click Move Folder and move this over to somewhere to organize it, but that's okay, I'm not actually going to do that. Might be a good idea, but I'm still not going to do that right now. Okay, first thing that I'm going to need to do is actually kind of copy over the component information so that I have something with which I can work. All right, so one of the things that I would do is I would come in and I would say, okay, morning activity. Feel free to shorten it if you'd like. You could just call it morn, for that matter, but make certain that you're doing something that others could actually figure out pretty well. To save us a little bit of time, here's what I'm going to do. I've actually made all of these so that I can actually make the tables that you see in there. I'm just going to copy and paste them in. Now, that's cheating on my part, but in fairness, I did actually type all of these things in and more because I created all of these, but I'm just now going to try and get all of these materials copied over for us to use. Okay, this one didn't copy over because it's a thing that Excel does where you can actually do the equations, which is very helpful, but I'm just going to call this EP enjoyment points for now. Okay, I'm going to leave that there. I also have my color coding. By default, you'd have to go through and actually type those in. You can come, if you click on a cell, you can always come up here to the, looks like a cup dripping, and fill color, and we could color this whatever we want. I could make that black, and then I could change the text color, say to white, for good contrast. You don't have to do these things, but I will say this, especially if you're working with other people, it helps to have something that is easier to look at, because with some of the more complex scenarios, you may end up with just a wall of numbers, and it's hard to focus on what you're doing. And having something that someone else can walk up to and understand is incredibly important. In general, it is, but most importantly, if you're going to the next step beyond these competitions, if you want to actually get a career doing this, your employers are going to be much happier if you can set up things that other people can work with quickly and efficiently. So don't dismiss the importance of keeping things orderly and easy to work with. Okay, I don't know if this is going to match the color exactly, but I'm going to go ahead and put that in, and then I'm going to go ahead and make that white there, and then maybe bold. Okay. And then I can also center it by clicking there. Okay, I'm going to go through this a little bit faster, but now that I've got these, I can go through and I could do a combinations approach. Combos. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I can do the following. If I want to check pretty much everything and to see what's going on with it, I can go through and try and say, okay, well, one of the things that I could have is the museum, and then I could have that matched up with the beach, and then I could have the museum matched up with the amusement park and fine dining, arcade, and so forth. Well, one of the things that I could do then is I could say that I've probably got, let's see, I'm going to take the museum, I'm going to highlight those cells, and I'm going to copy them, and I'm with Control-C, I'm going to paste them. I'm also going to do a thing over here that says score. Okay, great. And I can then do the same thing with the beach. I'm going to, just so I can keep track of it, keep track of my cost, time, and my enjoyment points. Okay. This may seem redundant initially, but I know that what I can end up doing is actually this. I'm going to copy more than just the beach, and I'm going to paste that in. Now I've got the beach, amusement park, fine dining, arcade, and botanical garden. I can also, I want to see what the museum does with each of these. I can actually paste that in all of these spots. They have this on the official materials videos, but I'm just repeating it here. So hopefully you've seen this elsewhere. And we can then go on and do another important thing. You don't have to do this, but I like to. I like to squeeze this section in and then maybe color it black, make it effectively a line so that it separates it in my mind. And I can go through, and here's a key thing that I need. Total time. Okay. I know that the amount of time that I have available for the 1 hour day is 7 hours. So here's what I can do. I can make a column that is checking the total time. I want to do some math. So what I'm going to need to do is I need to start by hitting the equals sign. This is a commonly overlooked thing, but it's very important. You need to start by hitting the equals sign. And then what I can do is I want this column to take the time for the museum, which is 4 hours. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to click on that. That's in K3, and it's 4. But the computer will actually fill that in for me. It's just going to take whatever number is in that column. Then I'm going to hit the plus sign because I want to add it to the time for my afternoon. I can put these together and I can see, hey, just like that, it has now told me that my total time is 8 hours. Well, that's great, but I'm going to be clicking buttons forever if I go through and do that for all of them. But I want the same exact equation for all of them. So that's where this little circle on the bottom right, or square in Excel, comes in handy. I've taught the spreadsheet the equation by clicking on the cells, and now I can drag this down, and I can see, oh, it gave me that 4 plus 4 is 8 here, but now I can see 2 plus 4 is 6. I can get the total time for all of these. Okay, great. So that's wonderful. Hey, let's try that with something else we'll need, the total cost. Well, I can do equals. Now, it may ask you to, it may try and read your mind and do the summation of, hey, 400 and 300. Hey, this time it actually read my mind pretty well. It doesn't always. A lot of times I ignore whatever the recommendation is. But I've got this. I clicked on my two costs for this. So 400 and 300, I get a total cost of 700, so that's great. And then now Sheets is trying to read my mind. Sometimes it's good at it, and it says, hey, do you want me to do the same thing for all these cells underneath it? In fact, I do. So I'm going to click the check mark. And now I've got it doing all this work for me. Something that would have taken me even longer than probably how much we've done in this video thus far, depending on how fast you are, because I know that this is a long video. But typing all these into a calculator would have taken a lot of time. But we're just getting started. Now I can also go total PEP and total KEP. I can do the following. It looks like it's trying to read my mind, and hey, it's actually doing a very good job on this. So I'm going to do that. And then I can drag this down. No, it clearly did not do. Okay, here is where I should have paid closer attention. It is trying to add, it's adding some from elsewhere. I'll be honest, I don't know what it's doing. And this is why I don't like relying on it reading my mind. Okay, I want my total PEP. So I'm going to take the PEP from this option and the PEP from that option and add those together. 8. 8 looks right. When it returns 1016, you should probably be worried. Oh, it's adding the total cost next to it. I don't know why. Okay, this is why you can try the automatic generated things, but a lot of times spreadsheets, if they were smart, then we wouldn't need us to be able to do these things. Okay, I'm going to do total kep, and I'm going to manually put that in. I think it's adding all the stuff that has total in it. Okay, and then after I did that, it says, hey, do you want me to fill that in? I do, actually. So now I've got all these things. Okay, so we've got all this, but this is just for the museum. Oh, wait. Well, the next thing that I could do is the skate park combined with all the stuff. Okay, so I could paste that in. But I'm going to need it to go with all the other options on here too, the beach, the amusement park, fine dining, and so forth. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to duplicate these a number of times. Okay, and now that I've got the skate park, I can go all the way until I start repeating again with the beach. Now I've got the skate park, and I could go in and start filling in the other options. The skyscraper, the city tour, the shopping. I can put all those there by copying and pasting. You don't want to have to retype all of these, so use your copy-paste. You typed everything in once, and now with copy and paste, you're getting the computer and your ability to organize it to do the work for you. Now watch this. If I go down, I can actually highlight all of these and drag down, and now, with the click of a few buttons, I now have all of the skate park options already figured out. Hopefully you're starting to see why this can be so useful. Okay, but beyond just totaling things up, we've also got additional things that we want to take a look at. So now that I've got some useful information, I can go on to actually scoring. Okay, so here's one of the things that I can do. Budget points. I'm not going to do all of this for you because I want to keep things moving, and there are a couple more things that I want to show you. But let's go through and actually look at what we would need to do to get our budget points. The budget points are the preferred budget of $1,000 minus whatever your total cost is divided by $7. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to teach the equation to my spreadsheet. So I'm going to hit equals, and I'm going to take my total cost, or sorry, not my total cost, $1,000. So I'm going to do 1,000 minus my total cost, and I need to do that entire thing divided by 7. So here's what I'm going to do. If you put divided by 7 without parentheses, it will just divide U3 by 7. It will not do the full thing. Order of operations and mathematics is very important. So make certain that you're using parentheses appropriately so that you can get the answer that you're looking for. It does not hurt for you to grab a calculator and manually check one or two of your solutions to make certain your spreadsheet is solving it correctly. But now that I've taught it this, the first one is going to give me budget points of about 42. Now I'm not going to drag this all the way down because now I'm starting to do your job for you, but I can see that we've got budget points for each of these options starting off. Let's say that that was actually my total score. It turns out I'm going to need probably more scoring stuff over here. If you run out of room where it says column Z, you can also go in, right-click, and do insert one row to the, I guess, left. That sounds fine. You can keep inserting columns to the left so that you can actually add some more columns in here as needed. Some of these can result in a whole lot of columns that you need, but it can be very helpful. Okay, so here's what I can do. I planned ahead, and at the very beginning, because I don't want to have to scroll all the way to the end if there are a whole bunch of columns, I can do score. Well, let's say that I set up a bunch of extra columns and I finally get it to pull my total score back over here. I'm just going to have it pull the budget points for now. I can go over and tell it, hey, pull this value from whatever my total score is. So I'm going to drag this down, and you'll notice that it only pulls things that actually have numbers associated with them, but I have them right here. Well, that's great. Now I have an easy to look at spot where I can tell what my total score is. Now there are a couple of other things that I want to introduce on this. You might end up with a whole bunch of these things, combinations that go down and you have to scroll for a while. Hint, hint, 2A3 will probably have that. Here's another thing that you can do. I'm going to teach you a basic function. I'm going to go in and I'm going to say max score and min score. Okay. So on this, next to max score, I'm going to hit equals, and I'm going to type in max. Now this is a pre-made function built into spreadsheets. I need to do max for the function, open parentheses, and it basically says, okay, tell me what things you want to know the maximum of. Highlight all of your scores, hit enter, and then it will give me the maximum value. Well, the maximum value I see right now is 57. Okay, well, it's saying, hey, my max score is 57. It's trying to do that on the next one, but it's not smart. I'm going to use min instead. What is my minimum score in here? And I can see that my minimum score is actually 0. Now remember, this is just based on the budget points. Okay, I'm going to do another thing in here though. I'm going to teach you a conditional statement. We've got a problem. Right now, our max points, or not necessarily, I shouldn't say our max points, but one of our options is saying that we get 43 points, but we won't actually. And I know why. Our total time is 8 hours. Remember, we can't actually get solutions, or it's not an acceptable solution for the family to have something that totals over 7 hours. They only have 7 hours available. So here's where I can check on the time, and I'm going to do the following. Time limits. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, what I want is something where the spreadsheet will actually check this for me. There are two possible outcomes. One, either the total time is 7 hours or less, and I'm free to continue working, and I'm going to get all those points. Or two, my total time is greater than 7 hours, and I need the spreadsheet to tell me, hey, you're not actually going to get any points on this. Well, we can use a common logic function called if statements. Okay, I'm going to do if, open parentheses. The first thing, and it walks you through here, it says logical expression. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. If my total time is greater than 7 hours, so I'm going to put in that value, then I hit comma, that takes me over, that's my logical expression, so that's the thing it's going to check. It's going to look at this number, and I've told it, hey, if that number is greater than 7, that means I'm in trouble, and I want it to return a 0. Or if that value is not greater than 7, then I'm not in trouble, and I want it to return a 1. I'm going to close this up, and so now I click OK, yeah, go ahead and spread that, and I can see the first two solutions total up to more than 7 hours, so I've got time limits equal 0, and for the other two, which are 6 and 7 hours, I've got them returning 1. Well, here's what I can do. Do this, where now it returns a 0, and you can say your total score would be, well, you'd need more than just your budget points. I'm skipping over a couple things, but I'm going to click on whatever my points are, and I'm going to multiply it by whatever my time limiting factor is. So if I end up with something that is over time, it will then multiply my score by 0, and it will return 0 instead of the non-existent score. In other words, I'm building in a way that it can check the times for me, so I don't have to manually do it. But I need to know how to teach that to the computer. In this case, an if statement would be very useful. Okay, so now I've got it where the first two options are actually over time, and so now they're returning a score of 0. So I might be better off to actually say my score is not the original column, but I could go over and actually do the score column instead. And then drag this down, and then now I've got it where it will give me the updated scores. Okay, that's about the most that I want to do in this particular approach, but there is a little bit more that I'd like us to take a look at. This one is what I would call combos. That's where you actually do all the different combinations and try and do some of the math along with it. This is a very powerful tool for you to go through and do analysis and be able to check different solutions, and most importantly, be able to get math done for you. But another great way to approach this, and another technique that I'd like to introduce you to, is what I like to call the scoring. Now, this is the sort of thing that I would put together for scoring this sort of thing. In other words, finding out what the score is based on what submissions other people have. Now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I am going to do something a little bit tricky with this, because I want to show you this. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy both of the tables that we need, and I'm going to move them down a little bit, say down over here. I'm leaving a spot open, and I'm going to say morning, and afternoon. And I'm going to go beneath both of them, and I'm going to put selection. Okay. Here's what I would like. I would like something where I could say total time, hours. I can go through and start collecting some of my numbers, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit equals, and instead of just collecting the museum or the beach, I'm actually going to go down to the spot in the column that I said is selection. And I'm going to add, sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. I need the time in selection, and I'm going to add both the times for selections. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. Right now it says 0, but here's where I'm actually going to introduce something especially interesting. I'm going to highlight all the cells next to my selections. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go down to view more cell actions. This is something where Sheets actually does a really good job and Excel is a little bit harder to use. Data validation is what I'm looking for. Okay, with data validation, it brings up something over here that says rules. I can add a rule. For all of these that I've selected, you can do a drop down, you can do a whole bunch of things, but we actually kind of like checkbox, and we're going to use custom cell values. If it's checked, I'm going to tell it to say that that's 1, and if it's unchecked, I'm going to say that it's 0. Basic logic stuff. Here's a little bit of rudimentary programming is a good way to look at it. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm also going to, click done, and then I'm going to add some onto this, add another range. I want to do the same thing for the afternoon activities. Okay, done. So I've got a checkbox that I can come in and I can click on, or I can hit spacebar. I can check whichever one that I would like. But what I really want is I want to make this where it's selectable. So here's what I'm going to do. My selection. Here's where we're going to use something called a nested if statement. Okay, I introduced the if statements to you before, but you can actually put if statements inside of if statements. This is a little complex. You might want to watch this a couple of times, but it can be very useful in setting up for scoring and another way to approach how you want to do this problem. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, if this box with the check mark is equal to 1, in other words, true, then what it should return is the value museum. Otherwise, here is our else if, the value if false. If that is not true, I'm going to put in another if statement. Instead of just saying, okay, call it the skate park, I'm going to say, okay, now check the next thing. If this box is equal to 1, then return the skate park. Otherwise, check the next one. If this is equal to 1, return the skyscraper. Okay, great. Otherwise, if this is equal to 1, return, comma, the city tour. Otherwise, if this is equal to 1, return this option. Okay, whoops, it cut me out. Oh, I forgot to hit a comma. This can take a little bit to get set up. Okay, and then finally, since I'm out of things to check, I can say if all of these are false, return quotation mark, space, quotation mark. That'll be an empty cell. Okay, I think I've got enough parentheses there. And we can see that now I've got this checked and it says museum. But watch this. If I uncheck it, it says nothing. If I check here, it says skyscraper. Okay, I want to drag this over, but if I do that, it starts to get a little bit weird. It's going to return weird results, nothing, mainly because if I click on it, we can see it's trying to check a checkbox where museum is. So that's not what I want. Okay, so I need to clean this up a little bit. I want to make it where when I drag this over, it does not actually leave column A. So everywhere I see an A, I'm going to use a trick, which we hopefully have introduced in other videos with spreadsheets. I'm going to save a little bit of time, but I'm going to put a $sign in front of all the A's. The $sign on that address tells the spreadsheet, do not change this value. In this case, don't change A. Anything that's in column A, I want you to keep as column A, which is what I want, so it constantly checks the correct checkbox. And here we can see now when I drag this across, it follows how much I've dragged with column D, like it stops pulling museum and instead pulls the thing from this column, but it is only checking column A because I put those $signs in. Okay, great. Now I've got it where the museum is equal to 400 cost, time of 4 hours, PEP of 5, and KEP of 2, now that I've selected the morning. Well, we can see that my total hours are now 4 because that's what I've got filled in on my selection. But if I switch this out to the city tour, we see that it returns 2. I can do the same thing down here and get it where I can select one of these, and now I can quickly say, okay, if I want the city tour and the amusement park, I can click these two things and have it start pulling numbers up here to eventually get to my score, which will be my end goal. The last thing that I'll say is this. You've got a lot of things where you're going to have some things that you input and some things that you do not. In other words, things where you add numbers and places where you don't want to add numbers. You'll see numbers in there, but it helps to have a system to work with others and yourself later that you know, hey, here's a spot where you put a number and spots where, hey, don't touch this number, it's automatically calculated. So for instance, I added all of these things. I and my students default to just the yellow highlighter on it. Anytime in my resources you see a yellow cell in a spreadsheet, that's actually a clue that says, hey, this is a spot where we expect you, the user, to put in a number. You're the source of that number. A lot of times for the scores, anything that I'm looking for, I might do in blue or purple. I'm partial to purple myself. And so a lot of times I'll put the end goal, the score, in something where it draws the eye. There's a lot of other cool things that you can do with conditional statements. You can get something to warn you if you have gone overweight or over budget. You can also get something where with conditional formatting, I'll go ahead and show you that, more cell actions, conditional formatting, you can actually get the cell to change color based on whether or not you're in or outside of an allowed specification. We'll save that for another video because this is already getting very long. All right, but these were a few things that we wanted to show you so that you have an approach where you can start to move away from having to type a bunch of things into a calculator, which can be time consuming, and having to get overwhelmed with the numbers. We want you to start being able to use spreadsheets in a good way so that you can get them to do a lot of the work for you. But they're just doing math for you. If you put in the wrong number, say, oh, maybe it wasn't 4 hours, this was supposed to be 8 hours. Well, now that I change it here, I'm going to have to go back and change it in all the rest of my stuff. It is still you putting in the numbers and you having to program in the equations. One last point that I might put in is you can right-click on any of the cells and add a comment. And in this comment, you can go through and give important information. If you're working in a team, or even for yourself to come back and check this later, it can be very good to document what you're doing. These are basically like comments in code. They won't change anything, but they give you more information. Let's see. Preferred cost minus total cost, all divided by 7. That way, if I come back later, I can hover over this and I can actually get an idea, oh, this is what I'm actually doing with this column and how this number is being found. You may find that, oh, it wasn't divided by 7, it's actually supposed to be divided by 10, and then you could go through, and now that you are described what's going on here, you could change the 7 to a 10. All right, this has been a very long video, but hopefully it's given you a lot of great things to work with.